"That red dress would look even better on my floor," he said, the silver badge on his chest, glinting under the harsh midday sun. He believed his uniform gave him the right to own anything or anyone. He wanted in this neighborhood. He saw a beautiful black woman as his next conquest. What he didn't see was the predator hiding behind her eyes. Before we continue, tell me where in the world you're watching from. And make sure you subscribe, because the downfall that's coming is one for the history books. The moving truck had barely pulled away from the curb when Officer Jack Harlan made his move. He'd been watching the house for a week, ever since the sold sign went up. This neighborhood, with its manicured lawns and towering oak trees, was his domain. He knew every family, every car, every quiet secret behind the pristine facades. He was the gatekeeper, the guardian of its placid, wealthy, and overwhelmingly white character. And then she arrived, Sarah Brooks. He'd run her plates the moment he saw her black Mercedes pull into the driveway. Single 35, recently relocated from Washington, D.C. No record. But that wasn't what held his attention. It was the way she moved, the confident tilt of her chin, the fluid grace in her long limbs, the way the sunlight caught the deep mahogany of her skin. She was, in his estimation, a masterpiece of a woman. A masterpiece that didn't belong here. He found his opening that afternoon. Sarah was on her front porch, a glass of iced tea in hand, her figure poured into a breathtaking red silk dress that clung to every curve. The dress was a splash of defiant color against the muted beige of the house. Harlan pulled his patrol car to the curb, the engine's low rumble, the only sound on the sleepy street. He took his time getting out, adjusting his belt, letting his presence sink in. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and thick-necked, with a face that seemed permanently set in a sneer. His eyes, a pale, cold blue, raked over her body with an unnerving sense of ownership. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, his voice a low drawl that was meant to be charming, but felt like gravel scraping on skin. He stopped at the bottom of her porch steps, forcing her to look down at him. "Just wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood, Officer Jack Harlan." He tapped the badge pinned to his chest. "I keep an eye on things around here." Sarah's smile was polite, but it didn't reach her eyes. Those eyes, dark and intelligent, were assessing him, cataloging the slight bulge of his gut over his belt, the possessive way he stood, the undisguised hunger in his gaze. "Thank you, officer. I'm Sarah Brooks. It's a beautiful neighborhood." Her voice was smooth, cultured, with no trace of the intimidation he was used to eliciting. It annoyed him. "It is," Harlan agreed, letting his eyes linger on the swell of her chest. "We like to keep it that way. Quiet, peaceful for a certain kind of people." The implication hung heavy in the humid air. He took a step up, his polished black boot landing on her pristine white porch. He was invading her space. "Pretty big house for just one person. Must get lonely in there." "I enjoy my privacy," Sarah said, her voice dropping a fraction of a degree. She remained seated, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her stand, of seeing her retreat. Harlan's smirk widened. He leaned against the porch railing, getting uncomfortably close. "That red dress would look even better on my floor," he said, the words slithering out, low and venomous. There was no pretense of a welcome now. This was a demand. Sarah's expression didn't change, but deep inside a switch flipped. Years of training of operating in hostile environments where a single misstep meant death took over. Her heart rate remained steady, her breathing even. She was no longer a new homeowner. She was an operative, and he was the target. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice laced with ice. "You heard me," Harlan said, his arrogance bloating with every passing second. He believed he held all the cards, the badge, the gun, the perceived power of his race in this neighborhood. See, a woman like you moving in here, you're going to need protection. A friend on the force. I can be that friend. A very close friend. He reached out, his thick fingers tracing a line in the air just inches from her bare arm. Sarah didn't flinch. She simply looked at his hand, then back to his face. I think you should leave now, officer. His face darkened. The thin veneer of civility vanished. I don't think you understand the situation, he growled, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. This is my town, my rules, and I always get what I want. You can either be nice about it, we can have a good time, and your life here will be very easy, or... He let the word hang. You can be difficult, and I'll make you wish you'd never even heard of this place. I will tear your life apart, piece by piece, starting with that pretty little house and that fancy car. So, what's it going to be, Sarah? He stood there silhouetted by the sun, a monster in a blue uniform, utterly convinced of his own power. He saw her as an easy conquest, a beautiful object to be taken. He had no idea he wasn't talking to a civilian. He had no idea he had just threatened a woman who had dismantled entire terror cells with less effort than it took her to choose her dress that morning. He thought he was the predator. He was about to find out how it felt to be the prey. Harlan's campaign of terror began subtly, a masterclass in psychological warfare designed to fray her nerves and remind her of his omnipresent power. His patrol car was always there. When she left for a morning run, it would be parked across the street. Engine off, a silent, menacing sentinel. When she returned from the grocery store, he'd be a block down, watching her carry her bags inside. He never used his lights or siren. He didn't have to. The simple, constant presence of his vehicle was a declaration of ownership, a brand on her newfound freedom. He escalated. A package delivered to her porch was mysteriously sliced open, its contents untouched, but the message clear. Her morning newspaper was often found shredded on the lawn. He'd pull her over for fabricated reasons, a rolling stop at a sign a block from her house, or for going 2 km/h over the speed limit. During these stops, he was never aggressive enough to warrant a formal complaint. Instead, he was sickeningly familiar, leaning into her window, his voice a low, suggestive purr. Just making sure you're safe, Sarah. A woman like you needs looking after. His eyes would roam over her, making her feel stripped bare. He was enjoying this, the slow, methodical process of trying to break her. But Harlan was operating on a faulty premise. He assumed he was dealing with a civilian, a woman who would eventually crumble under the pressure. He had no concept of Sarah's true nature. The day after his first threat, she had transformed her quiet suburban home into a fortress of intelligence. The work was second nature to her. Years in Damascus, Cairo, and Bogota had taught her that survival depended on controlling her environment. She spent hours sweeping for bugs, her movements precise and efficient. She found one, a low-grade audio transmitter clumsily hidden under the lip of her new kitchen island. Harlan, or someone he knew, had been inside her house. A cold fury, clean and sharp, settled in her chest. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was an invasion. She didn't remove the bug. Instead, she used it. She made carefully scripted phone calls to a fictitious friend, complaining about a creepy cop and how scared she was, her voice trembling with practiced fear. She played the part of the victim perfectly, feeding Harlan's ego while she laid her own traps. Using a series of encrypted satellite relays, technology far beyond anything the local police department could trace, she established a secure command center in her basement. While Harlan sat in his car watching her front door, Sarah was in the shadows watching him. She installed her own surveillance. Micro cameras no bigger than a screw head were discreetly placed on her property, covering every angle of the street. A long-range directional microphone, disguised as part of a garden sprinkler, captured every word he spoke on his radio or phone when he parked nearby. His digital life was an open book to her. She ghosted into the town's municipal servers, her fingers flying across the keyboard, bypassing firewalls that were laughably amateurish. She cloned his phone, downloaded the entire contents of his police cruiser's laptop, and set up alerts for every keyword associated with her name or address. The man who thought he was the all-seeing eye was in fact living in a glass house of his own making. Sarah learned everything. She mapped out his routines, his favorite diner, his shift patterns. She uncovered his financial records, noting the suspicious cash deposits that far exceeded his salary. She listened to his calls, the racist jokes he shared with other officers, the casual cruelty in his voice as he talked about other people he'd harassed. He wasn't just a creep obsessed with her. He was a symptom of a much deeper disease. One afternoon, as Harlan sat in his cruiser watching her water her roses, he got a call. Sarah listened in, the audio feed crystal clear in her ear. It was his patrol sergeant. "Hey, Jack. Chief Thompson wants to see you. Something about a complaint." Harlan's laugh was harsh. "Don't tell me the new girl finally got the nerve. Let me guess, I'm making her uncomfortable." The sergeant chuckled. "Something like that? Don't worry. The chief will handle it." A cold smile touched Sarah's lips. Handle it. She knew what that meant. The system wasn't going to save her. It was designed to protect men like Harlan. She'd known this would be the case, but she needed to see it play out. She needed to understand the full scope of the rot before she could cut it out. Harlan started his car and drove off, confident he was heading to a meeting where his behavior would be excused, even condoned. Sarah watched him go, not with fear, but with the chilling patience of a predator who knows the hunt has just begun. She had let him think he was in control. Now it was time to introduce him to the real chain of command. The police station was a sterile brick building that smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. It was designed to be intimidating, a place where authority was absolute. Sarah walked through the glass doors, her heels clicking with quiet purpose on the polished linoleum floor. She still wore the red dress. A deliberate choice. It was the armor she had worn when he first threatened her, and she would wear it now as she challenged his power on his own turf. Heads turned as she passed. Officers behind desks and in hallways stopped their conversations to stare. Their eyes, a mixture of curiosity and contempt. The news of Harlan's new obsession had clearly made the rounds. They saw her not as a citizen seeking help, but as a problem. Chief Robert Thompson's office was at the end of a long corridor, its wooden door imposing and solid. His secretary, a woman with a face like pinched granite, made Sarah wait for 20 minutes. A petty power play meant to unsettle her. Sarah simply sat, her back perfectly straight, her hands resting calmly in her lap, her patience an unnerving weapon. Finally, the door opened. "The chief will see you now." Chief Thompson was the opposite of Harlan. Where Harlan was brutish and overt, Thompson was smooth and polished. He was in his late 40s with perfectly coiffed silver hair, an expensive suit, and a smile that was all teeth. He stood as she entered, extending a hand over his vast mahogany desk. "Ms. Brooks, thank you for coming in. Please have a seat." His office was a shrine to himself, filled with awards, plaques, and photos of him shaking hands with smiling politicians. "Thank you for seeing me, Chief," Sarah said, her voice even. "Of course," he said, settling back into his high-backed leather chair. He steepled his fingers, looking at her over them with an expression of paternal concern that was utterly false. I understand you've had some interactions with one of my officers. Officer Harlan, he tells me he was just trying to be a good neighbor, make you feel welcome. His version of a welcome? Sarah replied, her gaze unwavering. Involves telling me my dress would look better on his floor and threatening to ruin my life if I didn't become his close friend. Thompson let out a soft chuckle, a dismissive, patronizing sound. Miss Brooks, Jack can be a little old-fashioned, a bit rough around the edges. He's a decorated officer, comes from a long line of cops. Sometimes his attempts at charm can be misinterpreted, especially by someone new to our town's ways. There was no misinterpretation, Chief. It was a threat. He has been harassing me for a week. He parks outside my house for hours. He pulls me over without cause. He's been inside my home. The chief's smile tightened ever so slightly at the last statement. Now that's a very serious accusation. Do you have any proof of that? He knew she didn't. Or so he thought. He was testing her, daring her to challenge the word of his decorated officer. My proof, Sarah said, leaning forward slightly, is that a man who represents your department is using his badge to intimidate a citizen. He is creating an environment of fear. I came here today assuming you would take that seriously. Oh, I do take it seriously, Thompson said, his voice turning colder, the fake charm dissolving to reveal the steel beneath. I take it very seriously when an outsider comes into my town and starts making wild accusations against a respected officer. You know, Miss Brooks, this is a peaceful community. We don't have the kinds of problems they have in the big cities. We handle things quietly here. A misunderstanding like this, it could attract the wrong kind of attention. It could disrupt the harmony we all work so hard to maintain. The threat was no longer veiled. He was telling her to back down, to accept her place. He wasn't a public servant. He was a king protecting his feudal lord. So what you're telling me, Sarah clarified, her voice dangerously quiet, is that you are not going to investigate my complaint. You are in fact telling me to endure the harassment, or there will be consequences. Chief Thompson stood up, the picture of calm authority. He walked to the window, looking out over the town he controlled. What I'm telling you, Miss Brooks, is that you should think very carefully about your next steps. Jack Harlan is a valuable member of my team. An attack on him is an attack on this entire department, and we protect our own. He turned back to face her, his eyes cold and hard as stone. You seem like a smart woman. I'm sure you'll make the right decision. Thank you for your time. It was a dismissal. The audience was over. Sarah stood, her movements fluid and unhurried. She had gotten exactly what she came for, confirmation. The rot went all the way to the top. Harlan wasn't a lone wolf. He was a foot soldier in a corrupt army, and Thompson was his general. As she walked out of the office, past the smirking secretary and the staring officers, she felt no fear, only a profound, clarifying sense of purpose. They had drawn the battle lines. They thought they had her cornered, isolated and powerless. They had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had declared war on an enemy they couldn't possibly comprehend. The system had failed her, just as she knew it would. The blue wall was not just a code of silence. It was a fortress, and Thompson was its warden. Going to the FBI was an option, but a risky one. It would involve bureaucracy, delays, and a potential for leaks. More importantly, it would take the control out of her hands. After her meeting with Thompson, Sarah knew this was no longer about just stopping Harlan. It was about dismantling an entire corrupt enterprise. And for that, she needed a different kind of ally. Someone who knew the local terrain. Someone who had fought this beast before and bore the scars to prove it. Her research led her to one name: Michael Caine. He was a lawyer, but not one of the slick corporate types that populated the town. His office was a small, cluttered space above a bookstore on Main Street, smelling of old paper and fresh coffee. The man himself matched the office. Michael was in his early 40s with tired eyes, a rumpled shirt, and the weary cynicism of a man who'd seen too much injustice. He had a reputation as a fighter, a local David who had spent years slinging legal stones at the Goliath of the police department, mostly without success. "I don't take civil rights cases against the cops anymore," he said flatly before Sarah had even finished her introduction. He didn't offer her a seat. He stood leaning against a bookshelf overflowing with legal texts, his arms crossed. "It's a waste of time. Thompson has the judges in his pocket and the town council is terrified of him. You can't win." "I'm not asking you to file a lawsuit, Mr. Kane," Sarah said, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to his agitated energy. "I'm looking for a strategic partner." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "A partner for what? To get yourself run out of town or worse? Lady, you have no idea what you're up against." "I do. 5 years ago, I represented the family of a young man, Marcus Thorne. Harlan and his partner beat him so badly during a routine traffic stop that he ended up with permanent brain damage. We had witnesses. We had medical records. The case was thrown out. The witnesses recanted after visits from officers. The DA refused to press charges. A month later, I was audited by the IRS. My car was broken into twice. It's how they work. They don't just beat you in court. They try to erase you." "I know what they did to Marcus Thorne," Sarah said quietly. "I also know they planted the drugs found in his car." The evidence bag was tampered with, a fact that was conveniently omitted from the official report. Michael stopped, his cynical expression faltering for the first time. He stared at her. "How could you possibly know that? That report was sealed." Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a slim tablet. She slid it across the desk toward him. On the screen was a crystal-clear image of the original unredacted evidence report, complete with a timestamp showing it had been altered by a user logged in as R. Thompson. "I know because I have the original file," she said, "along with every other file Chief Thompson has tried to bury for the last 10 years. Michael slowly picked up the tablet, his eyes wide as he scrolled through the document. He looked up at her, a new light in his eyes. Not hope, but a sharp, calculating intelligence. "Who are you?" "I'm a woman who doesn't like being threatened," Sarah said simply. "And I have the resources to fight back. You have the local knowledge, the understanding of their legal maneuvers. I have the ability to gather the kind of evidence they can't dismiss or bury. Together, we can do what neither of us can do alone. Burn their whole corrupt house down." He was silent for a long time, studying her face, weighing the immense risk against the possibility of a justice he had long since given up on. He thought of Marcus Thorne, of the other families whose lives had been shattered. He saw in Sarah not a helpless victim, but a weapon, a highly sophisticated, incredibly dangerous weapon that had just been aimed at the heart of his oldest enemy. "They'll come after me again," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Harder than last time." "Yes, they will," Sarah confirmed, her gaze steady. "But this time we'll be ready for them. This time we'll be the ones setting the trap." A slow smile spread across Michael Kane's face. The first genuine smile he'd likely had in years. The weariness in his eyes was replaced by a familiar fire. The old fighter was back. "Okay," he said, finally gesturing to the worn chair in front of his desk. "Have a seat. Tell me everything and let's get to work." The alliance was forged, not in a courtroom or a corporate office, but in a dusty room above a bookstore. Two lone warriors joining forces against a common monstrous foe. The foundation of Thompson's empire had just developed its first critical crack. Their partnership was a seamless fusion of two different worlds. Michael's dusty office became their war room, its walls soon covered in timelines, photos, and complex diagrams mapping the connections between Harlan, Thompson, and a web of corrupt town officials. Michael brought the context, the history of their abuses. He pulled old case files pointing out the patterns Sarah might have missed. The same judges dismissing complaints. The same prosecutors losing key evidence. The same group of officers named in dozens of excessive force allegations that went nowhere. He was the institutional memory of their corruption. Sarah, in turn, brought the arsenal. While Michael navigated the labyrinth of public records and legal precedent, Sarah moved through the digital world like a phantom. She treated the town's entire infrastructure as a hostile network, and she was the ghost in their machine. She peeled back layers of their digital lives with surgical precision. She discovered a slush fund disguised as a civic improvement account that Chief Thompson controlled directly. It was funded by donations from local business owners and what the department called asset forfeiture, cash and property seized almost exclusively from minority residents during traffic stops and rarely documented properly. The money trail was damning. Funds from this account were used for lavish personal expenses, golf club memberships, vacations, even a down payment on a boat for Harlan. But it went deeper. Sarah uncovered a series of property transactions that reeked of conspiracy. Several homes owned for generations by black families in a historically less affluent part of town had been foreclosed upon under suspicious circumstances. These foreclosures often followed a period of intense police harassment, endless citations for minor code violations, repeated arrests of family members on trumped-up charges. Once the families were financially broken and forced to sell, the properties were snapped up for pennies on the dollar by a single development company. "Evergreen Holdings," Michael said, his finger tapping on the name on Sarah's screen. "That's a shell corporation. I've run into them before. Always anonymous, always paying in cash." "Not so anonymous anymore," Sarah replied. She brought up another screen showing a complex flowchart of financial transfers that moved through 3 different states before ending up in an offshore account. An account belonging to Chief Robert Thompson's wife. "My God," Michael breathed, staring at the screen. "This isn't just harassment and brutality. It's a land grab. They're using the police department as their own private collection agency to ethnically cleanse a neighborhood for profit." While Michael worked on building the legal framework for a massive racketeering case, Sarah focused her attention back on Harlan. She needed to tie him directly to the violence that underpinned their financial schemes. Her directional microphone became her most valuable tool. From her garden, she listened as Harlan conducted his business, his cruiser a mobile office for his cruelty. She recorded him bragging to another officer about shaking down a local restaurant owner. She recorded him using racial slurs to describe a family he was targeting for eviction. The most chilling recording came one evening. Harlan was talking on his personal phone, his voice low and angry. He was speaking to a real estate agent connected to Evergreen Holdings. "The Henderson kid is causing problems," Harlan growled, telling people he's not going to let them steal his grandma's house. "I might have to find something in his car, a little something to make him go away for a few years. That should quiet the old lady down." Sarah's blood ran cold as she listened. This was premeditated. He was planning to frame a young man to destroy his life simply to secure a piece of property. She saved the audio file, her hands clenching into fists. This was the proof they needed. Not just financial data and altered reports, but the voice of the predator himself, casually planning the destruction of a human life for profit. They had them. The digital net was woven tight and strong. They had the money, the conspiracy, the violence. It was a perfect case, a beautiful tapestry of irrefutable evidence. But Sarah knew men like Thompson and Harlan wouldn't go down quietly. They were cornered animals, and cornered animals were at their most dangerous. She sent a copy of the most damning files to a secure dead drop server, an insurance policy. The net was in place, but the most dangerous part of the hunt was still to come: springing the trap. The first sign of trouble came not as a frontal assault, but as a subtle shift in the atmosphere. A patrol car, not Harlan's, began making slow, regular passes down the street where Michael Caine lived. The anonymous online harassment started next. Vile comments on his small law firm's social media page. One-star reviews from profiles created hours earlier accusing him of incompetence and ambulance chasing. It was the standard playbook, the opening salvo of a campaign designed to discredit him. Sarah detected the digital surveillance on Michael's life almost immediately. His phone had been compromised. His emails were being mirrored to an external server. "They know," she told him during a meeting in a noisy coffee shop, their conversation masked by the hiss of the espresso machine. "They don't know what we have, but they know we're digging. Thompson is spooked." "Let him be," Michael said, a defiant glint in his eye. "We're almost ready." But they had underestimated the speed and brutality of Thompson's response. The attack, when it came, was devastatingly swift. Michael was driving home from his office late one night when the flashing lights filled his rearview mirror. 2 squad cars boxed him in. It wasn't Harlan. It was 2 of his closest cronies, officers whose names had appeared repeatedly in Michael's research. They dragged him out of the car, claiming he was weaving. The field sobriety test was a farce designed for him to fail. When he refused a breathalyzer, citing his rights, they slammed him against the hood of his car, cuffing him so tightly the metal cut into his wrists. "Resisting arrest," one of them grunted. During the pat-down, a small baggie of white powder fell from his jacket pocket. A pocket Michael knew had been empty. The news hit the local media like a bombshell. "Prominent local lawyer arrested for DUI and drug possession." His mugshot was everywhere. The face of the tired, cynical fighter now plastered across the town as a common criminal. Chief Thompson gave a press conference the next morning, his face a mask of solemn disappointment. "It's a sad day when one of our community leaders falls so far," he said to the cameras. "This is a reminder that no one is above the law." The fallout was catastrophic. The state bar immediately suspended his license pending the investigation. His clients panicked, started calling other firms. The landlord for his office served him an eviction notice, citing a morality clause in his lease. In less than 24 hours, Michael Caine's life and career, which he had spent 2 decades building, were systematically dismantled. He was out on bail, but he was professionally and socially ruined, branded a drug-addicted, drunk-driving lawyer. He was isolated, just as Thompson had planned. Sarah met him at his now empty office. He was packing the last of his books into a cardboard box, his movements slow and defeated. The fire she had seen in his eyes was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness. "They didn't just arrest me, Sarah," he said, his voice raspy. "They executed me. My reputation is gone. Everything I've ever worked for, it's all gone." "This isn't about you, Michael," Sarah said, her voice firm, cutting through his despair. "This was a message for me. They're trying to take my allies off the board. They think if they isolate me, I'll run." She walked over to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "They're wrong." He looked up at her, his face a mask of grief. "But what can we do now? They've taken my voice. No one will believe a disgraced lawyer." "You were the legal weapon," Sarah said, her eyes turning hard as obsidian. "They just broke that weapon, so now we use mine." She looked around the wreckage of his professional life, the shattered remnants of his fight for justice, the cold, clean fury she had felt when she found the bug in her kitchen returned, magnified 100-fold. This was no longer a strategic operation. This was personal. Thompson and Harlan hadn't just crossed a line. They had torched it. They wanted to show her what happened when you fought them. She was about to show them what happened when you picked a fight with the wrong woman. They had taken her ally. Now she would take their entire kingdom. With Michael sidelined, The full weight of the operation fell on Sarah's shoulders. The grief and fury she felt over what they'd done to him coalesced into a diamond-hard resolve. They had wanted to isolate her, to make her feel alone and terrified. Instead, they had unleashed her without needing to coordinate or explain her methods to a legal mind. She was free to operate in the shadows where she was most comfortable, most lethal. The time for gathering evidence was over. It was time to set the final trap. Her plan was audacious, relying on a deep psychological understanding of her target. Jack Harlan was not a complex man. He was driven by three things: racism, a lust for power, and an obsessive, possessive desire for her. He saw her as the ultimate prize, the beautiful black woman in the wealthy white neighborhood who had dared to defy him. Conquering her would be the ultimate affirmation of his dominance. Sarah would use that obsession as bait. She began by playing the part they had cast for her, the broken woman. She stopped her morning runs. The curtains of her house remained drawn during the day. When she did leave, she looked disheveled, her movements furtive, her eyes cast downward. Through the bug she had left in her kitchen, she staged tearful phone calls talking about how her lawyer had been arrested, how she was all alone, how she didn't know what to do. Maybe Harlan was right, she sobbed into the phone one evening. Maybe I should just do what he wants. I can't fight the whole police department. She knew Harlan was listening. The surveillance logs from his cruiser's data link showed him parked near her house more and more frequently. Like a vulture circling a dying animal, he was savoring her supposed descent into despair. He was waiting for the perfect moment to swoop in. Sarah gave him that moment. After a week of her performance, she made one last call, this time directly to the police station's non-emergency line, asking to speak with Officer Harlan. Her voice was small, defeated. I need to talk to him, she whispered to the dispatcher. It's personal. Harlan came to her house that evening just after dusk. He didn't come in his patrol car. He arrived in his personal pickup truck, a massive jacked-up machine that reeked of aggressive masculinity. He wasn't on duty. This was personal for him, too. He walked up to her porch with a swaggering, triumphant gait. He was the conquering hero. Sarah answered the door, wearing a simple black dress, a stark contrast to the defiant red silk. Her face was pale. Her eyes looked red-rimmed, a testament to the theatrical crying jag she had induced earlier. She looked vulnerable, beautiful, and beaten. Sarah, he said, his voice a low, possessive rumble. Knew you'd come around? Please, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Come in. I don't want the neighbors to see. It was the invitation he had been waiting for. He stepped inside, his presence immediately filling the space, his cheap cologne warring with the subtle scent of jasmine in her home. He looked around the pristine foyer, a smug, triumphant grin spreading across his face. He had won. He had broken her. Smart girl, he said, his eyes devouring her. Decided to stop fighting the inevitable. But what Harlan saw as a home was, in fact, a gilded cage she had meticulously constructed for him. The house was a technological marvel of espionage. Every room was wired. High-definition micro cameras were hidden in smoke detectors, light fixtures, and picture frames. Sensitive microphones were embedded in the walls. Every word, every expression, every micro-gesture would be captured from multiple angles. The entire system was streaming in real time to a network of secure servers she controlled, with duplicates being fed directly to Michael Caine and to her own private cloud. I want this to be over, Sarah said, leading him into the living room. You were right. I can't fight you. You're too powerful. She was stoking the flames of his ego, making him feel like a god. Damn right I am, he boasted, settling onto her sofa as if he owned it. "I told you from day one. This is my town. I run things here." He thought he was stepping into his kingdom. In reality, he had just walked into the most sophisticated interrogation room he would ever experience. The trap was set. The doors were locked. The prey had become the bait. And the predator was about to give the performance of a lifetime, a full confession, broadcast to a ghost audience he couldn't see. All Sarah had to do was press record. The living room was cast in soft, warm light, a deliberate choice by Sarah to create an atmosphere of intimacy and disarm her target. A bottle of expensive whiskey and 2 glasses sat on the coffee table. It was a perfectly staged scene of surrender. Harlan, basking in the glow of his perceived victory, poured himself a generous amount, his movements proprietary and crude. "See, this is much better, isn't it?" he said, taking a large swallow. "You and me being friendly? No need for all that ugliness?" He patted the cushion next to him. "Come on, sit down. Relax." Sarah complied, perching on the edge of the sofa, maintaining the illusion of a nervous, submissive woman. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice soft. "I shouldn't have gone to your chief." "That was a mistake." Harlan laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Thompson, don't you worry about him. He knows how to handle things. He knows how to handle people like you." The way he said, "people like you," was thick with racial animus. This was the opening Sarah needed. "What about my lawyer, Michael Kane? Did Chief Thompson have to do that?" she asked, her voice laced with feigned naivety. Harlan's ego, lubricated by the whiskey, took over completely. He leaned back, expansive and boastful, the king holding court. "Kane, he had it coming. Been a thorn in our side for years, trying to stir up trouble for the department. We had to teach him a lesson. Thompson has been waiting for an excuse to shut that little prick up for good." He took another drink, his words slurring slightly. "A bag of coke, a little pressure on the DA, problem solved. He won't be bothering anyone again." The confession was so casual, so blatant. It was chilling. All of it was being captured in pristine 4K resolution. "You're very powerful," Sarah murmured, looking at him with what she hoped passed for awe. "I never should have underestimated you." "Nobody should," he bragged, his chest puffing out. "This town, it runs on our terms. We keep it clean, we keep the property values up, and we keep the trash out." He looked directly at her, a cruel glint in his eye. "Some people don't get that. Like that Henderson kid over on the east side, running his mouth, trying to be a hero for his grandma. He's about to learn a hard lesson." "What kind of lesson?" Sarah prompted gently. "The kind that gets you 10 to 20 in a state facility." Harlan sneered. "It's amazing what you can find in a car when you look hard enough. An unregistered piece, maybe some product. He'll learn to keep his mouth shut." He was confessing to a future crime, outlining the plot to frame an innocent man. Sarah's face remained a mask of fearful admiration, but inside her mind was a steel trap, cataloging every word, cross-referencing it with the evidence she already had. "But how do you get away with it all?" she asked, playing her final card. "Doesn't anyone ever fight back?" He drained his glass and slammed it down on the table, the sound making her flinch for the camera. He leaned in close, his breath hot and sour with whiskey. "Listen to me and listen good," he growled, his voice a low conspiratorial whisper. "Nobody fights back because they can't. The judges, the DA, the mayor, they're all on our team. They know we're the ones keeping this town the way they want it. We're a wall. We keep things pure." His eyes bored into hers. "And you, a beautiful black woman with a house like this in my neighborhood, you're a threat to that purity. I can either be the guy who protects you, who makes you one of the good ones." He let his hand fall on her knee, his touch possessive and repulsive. "Or I can be the guy who removes the threat. It's that simple. It was the thesis statement for his entire rotten worldview. Racism, corruption, and violent control all laid bare. He believed he was seducing her, intimidating her into submission. In reality, he was delivering his own indictment, signing his own confession, and tying the noose around not just his neck, but the necks of everyone in his conspiracy. "I understand," Sarah whispered, letting a single perfect tear roll down her cheek. Harlan's grin was predatory. "I knew you would." He leaned in to kiss her, to claim his prize. Sarah turned her head at the last second. Could I have a drink first?" she asked, her voice trembling. "My nerves." "Of course, baby," he said, leaning back, fully convinced of his triumph. "Pour us another round." As Sarah stood and moved to the table, her back to him, her expression changed. The fear vanished, replaced by a look of absolute, chilling victory. He had given her everything, every crime, every motive, every co-conspirator, the entire case, gift-wrapped and delivered by his own arrogant mouth. The recording was complete. The trap had been sprung. Now all that was left was to bring the cage door slamming shut. As Harlan refilled his glass, basking in his victory, Sarah moved silently to the other side of the room. With a few deft taps on her phone, she initiated the final phase of her operation. The complete unedited video and audio stream from the past hour, Harlan's detailed confessions, was instantly uploaded from her secure servers and sent not just to the FBI's Washington field office, bypassing any local interference, but also to the State Attorney General, the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, and, for good measure, the national desks of 3 major news organizations. The digital bomb had been detonated. The fallout would be immediate. "What's the matter?" Harlan asked, his voice thick with whiskey and impatience. "Hurry up with that drink?" The first sound was a distant siren. Then another and another. They were converging, coming from all directions. Harlan's brow furrowed in confusion. He stumbled to the window, pulling back the curtain. The street moments ago dark and quiet was now a blinding chaos of red and blue flashing lights. Black, unmarked federal SUVs were screeching to a halt, boxing in his pickup truck. Tactical agents in full gear were swarming her lawn. "What the hell is this?" Harlan stammered, his drunken haze evaporating into a cold spike of fear. He spun around to look at Sarah. The vulnerable, broken woman was gone. In her place stood a figure of immense, unyielding power. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by a gaze as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. "This, Officer Harlan," she said, her voice ringing with authority, "is called accountability." The front door splintered open as a battering ram smashed through it. "FBI, hands in the air!" The house was flooded with armed agents, their weapons all trained on the stunned, pathetic figure of Jack Harlan. He stood frozen in the middle of the living room, a whiskey glass still in his hand, his face a mask of utter disbelief. The hunter was trapped, his own gilded cage now a federal crime scene. The empire of lies crumbled with astonishing speed as Harlan was being perp-walked out of Sarah's house in handcuffs, his face illuminated by a dozen news cameras that had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. Other federal teams were executing simultaneous raids across town. They hit the police station like a thunderclap. Agents swarmed the building, seizing computers, files, and phones. Officers who had been sharing racist jokes with Harlan hours earlier now stood with their hands against the wall, their faces pale with terror. Chief Robert Thompson was pulled from a late-night meeting with the mayor. The cameras captured his polished composure finally shattering as federal agents slapped cuffs on his wrists, reading him his rights for conspiracy, racketeering, and a host of civil rights violations. His reign was over. The raids continued through the night. The homes of the officers who had helped frame Michael Caine were breached. The offices of Evergreen Holdings were sealed, its financial records confiscated. The judges and prosecutors on Thompson's payroll received late-night visits that ended with them in the back of unmarked cars. The entire corrupt infrastructure, which had seemed so untouchable, so permanent, was being ripped out at the roots. By morning, the story was the #1 headline across the country. Corrupt police ring dismantled by undercover operative, the banners read. Clips from Sarah's hidden cameras were playing on a loop on every network. Harlan's smug confessions, his racist diatribes, his casual admission of framing innocent people. He had become the face of police corruption in America. Overnight from a hotel room across town, Sarah and Michael Caine watched the news unfold. A special prosecutor had already thrown out the charges against Michael, offering a formal apology. His name was cleared, his reputation restored in a single fiery baptism of truth. He watched, silent and vindicated. As the men who had destroyed his life were paraded before the world in disgrace, Sarah felt a quiet, profound sense of satisfaction. It was a clean operation, surgical. She had identified the cancer, and she had excised it with ruthless precision. On the screen, a reporter was interviewing residents of the neighborhood Thompson and Harlan had been trying to seize. The Henderson family was there, tears of relief streaming down their faces. "She saved us," Mrs. Henderson said, clutching her grandson's arm. "That woman, she saved us all." Sarah watched, a silent guardian they would never know. Her war was over. The silence of the lambs had been broken by the roar of a lioness. In the weeks that followed, the town underwent a painful but necessary rebirth. The federal investigation dug deeper, unearthing decades of systematic abuse. More arrests followed, reaching as high as the mayor's office. Town meetings, once sparsely attended formalities, were now packed with residents demanding transparency and oversight. The people who had lived in fear for so long were finding their voices, empowered by the truth that had been so dramatically exposed. The Henderson family, and others like them, were not only safe in their homes, but were also leading the charge for a new civilian review board. The revolution had been televised, and now it was being legislated. Michael Caine, his name and reputation fully restored, was at the heart of it all. He declined to sue the city for his own ordeal, instead creating a pro bono legal fund to represent the dozens of victims of Thompson's corrupt regime. He worked tirelessly, helping to get old convictions overturned, records expunged, and families reunited. The weary cynicism was gone, replaced by the fierce, hopeful energy of a man who had been given a second chance to fight for the justice he had always believed in. His small office above the bookstore was no longer to a place of defeat. It was a beacon of hope. Jack Harlan, Robert Thompson, and 17 other officers were denied bail. Facing a mountain of irrefutable evidence, most of them took plea deals, their confessions adding even more names to the list of the guilty. Harlan, stripped of his badge and his arrogance, was just a pathetic, broken man facing the consequences of his own hatred. The legal system, once his weapon, was now his cage. Sarah watched all of this from a distance. Her work was done. The new FBI task force overseeing the town's transition had offered her a commendation, a consulting position, a place in the new order. She politely declined. She wasn't a builder or a politician. She was a weapon, an instrument of shadow and steel, and her purpose had been served. The quiet suburban house, once a battleground, was put back on the market. Her short, violent chapter in this town was over. On her last evening, she sat on the porch. The same porch where Harlan had first threatened her. The red silk dress was packed away. She wore simple jeans and a t-shirt, looking not like an operative or a victim, but simply a woman at peace. The street was quiet, But it was a different kind of quiet now. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the gentle hum of a community starting to heal. A neighbor, an elderly woman who had once looked at her with suspicion, waved warmly as she walked her dog. The fear had been replaced by a tentative, fragile trust. Sarah knew the fight against the darkness in men's hearts was never truly over. The seeds of corruption and hatred were resilient. But she also knew that a single individual, armed with courage and an unwavering commitment to the truth, could bring an empire to its knees. She hadn't just sought revenge. She had delivered justice. Not the loud, chaotic justice of a courtroom drama, but the quiet, profound justice of a predator being outsmarted, of a system of lies collapsing under the weight of a single, unshakable truth. Her presence here had been a storm, but a storm that had cleared the air, allowing the sun to finally shine through. What did Sarah's story make you feel about the nature of power and control? Have you ever witnessed a situation where someone bravely stood up to injustice? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you for being a part of this journey.